Work. Work. Let's work. Work.
We're in the trenches, breaking down the defensive line from technique and fundamentals to NFL and college football analysis. You're listening to Big Dawg Trench Talk.
Work. 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 Let's work.
That's right, Big Dawg. It's time to go to work. What's up, Big Dawg? This is Coach Roll at 5-Star Linemen Academy, and welcome to another episode of Big Dawg Trench Talk. Big Dawg Trench Talk is an extension of BigDawgFootball.com. If you have not visited BigDawgFootball.com, Big Dawg, I suggest you do so. Take a look at www.BigDawgFootball.com. That's BigDawg.com. Big Dawg, we house some of the best defensive line content on site, and I highly recommend that you join the growing, expanding, updating, and upgrading and progressing BigDawgFootball.com. Big things are happening at BigDawgFootball.com. So, Big Dawg, let's get right into it. As a defensive lineman, how should I train in the offseason? Or just how should I train, period? Is there a proper way that a defensive lineman should train to be great? To me, that answer is simple, 100% yes. You know, most sports have an order to things. There is an order in which you train and develop someone. I remember growing up, my dad put me in karate. And I took karate because Bruce Lee was my hero. I mean, if you grew up watching Bruce Lee was the person you wanted to be. His hands were quick. His feet were quick. The man was unstoppable. You couldn't beat him. You couldn't take him down. He made the noises. He was smooth. You wanted to be Bruce Lee. And for me, just something really drew to me when I watched all the Bruce Lee movies. He really inspired me to want to be a martial artist. And so I asked my dad and said, Dad, I want to take karate. Can you put me in karate? Because I want to be like Bruce Lee. And he did. And it was probably one of the best things that ever happened to me growing up as a young man, because I learned a lot about a lot of things. And people take, martial arts, because they want to be good at martial arts, or they want to develop their hand mechanics. They want to, strengthen their core, and they want to, learn discipline and things like that. But man, when I took karate, it taught me a lot about discipline and character and who I was and where my strength came from. And also supplemental to that, I learned how to use my hands, and I believe that's where my hand speed came from, and my hand and eye coordination came from, and my understanding of, points of attack. Now, I didn't understand all of that when I was young. I didn't get that that's what I was being taught. All I was doing what my sensei told me, However, the reason why I brought that up is because when I took karate, one of the first things that I was taught was my feet positioning. That was the order. I was taught how to get in the proper stance. That if I was right-handed and this is how I wanted my position to be, and this is how I wanted to attack my opposition, that there was a proper stance to that. That's what I was taught. I was taught my foot placement and where my weight distribution should be. I was taught that when I took karate. And then my sensei, continued to work on, obviously, my conditioning and my core and my discipline. And he built me up from the ground up properly. But point is, he started with something. There was an order to it. Another example, same thing, when it came to weightlifting. I would say I had a pretty good, really good weight room program when I played at the University of Florida. And when I got to the University of Florida and I was taught how to properly lift weights, and I was taught, how to do the Olympic lifting and the plyometrics properly and the proper biomechanics and the optimal positions and what muscles I was engaged in and all those different things. I was learning. I understand it now a whole lot more. When I was an actual college player, I learned a little bit more about how to do things the right way. But once again, it started with my feet placement. That if I was going to do a deadlift, if I was going to do a snatch or a clean and jerk or a power clean, whatever it was, a squat, a front squat, a lunge, single leg plyos, whatever it was, if I was going to do anything, I was taught feet placement, that your feet have to be properly placed. There's an order to it. There was an order in which how I was trained. That was just a start. There was obviously you're talking about engaging your core. You're talking about your spine being aligned and things like that, making sure that you're in a proper position. I was taught all of that stuff as well. I didn't fully, again, understand what I was doing and why I was doing those things, but I realized over time that there was an order to what I was being taught. So when it comes to defensive line training, when it comes to properly training a defensive lineman to be excellent at the line of scrimmage, why is it that sometimes some coaches, at least, feel that there is no order when there is so much order to things that are successful? I'll give you another example. I don't know about you, Big Dawg, but when I wake up in the morning and that sun peeks through my blinds and wakes me up and I start hearing those birds chirp and I open my eyes and I thank God for another day that I get a chance to get up and go to work. Because I'm telling you, a real D lineman don't stop playing football. I'm always putting my hands in the dirt all the time in different ways, but I'm always getting in my stance and I'm always moving when that ball moves. I'm telling you, for me, when the sun peeks through those blinds, that's that ball grazing across those 3 blades of turf. And it's time to get going. It's time to go to work. It's time to put the car in drive, baby. But let me tell you, before I do any of that, and I thank God for another day that I'm 6 feet above the ground, you know what I'm saying? And every organ in my body is working. The next thing I do is I put my feet down. I don't do nothing until I put my feet down. I put my feet down first. I get my body, I sit up. But before I make any kind of progress, before I do any work, I got to put my feet down on that ground. And I'm grateful that when I wake up in the morning, I open my eyes, that I can put my feet down, Big Dawg. When I can put my feet down on the ground, I know it's time to go to work. But my point being is that I put my feet down first. That's what helps me transition from sleep to work. I know that if I can put my feet down, if I can get my feet out of the bed and I can put my feet down on the ground, for me, that triggers something in my brain that tells me that everything else to follow is work. My feet down, being planted on solid ground, tells me it's time to go to work. There's an order. There is an order as to how you properly train a defensive lineman to be great. I don't know anybody, at least I don't know anybody, that when they get out of the bed and they actually have legs and feet, that they put their hands down first on the ground, or they put their hands to work first. I don't know anybody, if they have legs and feet that they can use that work, that the first thing they do is put their hands to work. I'm not saying you doing things with your hands in the bed. You ain't working. You still really sleeping, honestly, because you in a really comfortable position. You not working. I'm talking about work. I'm talking about when it's time to actually go to work, when it's time to actually transition from your bed, your place of comfort and sleep and rest. And now that you are done resting, when it is time to transition from rest to work, that you do it with your hands first. I don't know anybody that does it that way. Not me, Big Dawg. I don't do it that way. When it's time for Big Dawg to transition from sleep, which I don't get a whole lot of, to work, shoot, it's about 11 o'clock right now and I'm still working. PM, baby. And when it goes for me from sleep to work, I put my feet down first. When I go from sleep to work, I put my feet down first. Yeah, there's an order. For me, Big Dawg, there's an order, and it starts with your feet. As I'm watching defensive linemen train in the offseason, and I'm watching them train, and people send me different training clips, or I happen to come across some on social media, and I'm watching what's going out there in the D-line community, and I love seeing guys get better and coaches work those guys and getting them progressing. I love seeing it, especially when I come across some good stuff. There's a lot of good D-line coaches out there, Big Dawg, for sure. No doubt about it. And I appreciate them for teaching these young men and young women the right way. But it does bother me when I see a defensive lineman or a coach say day one, and in day one, they're doing hand mechanics already. And they're doing hand mechanics in the wrong place. They're not positioned in the right place. They're not located in the right place. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, I wonder if they've gone over feet placement. I wonder if they've gone over where your feet should be as it pertains to the hand mechanics they're doing. Are we in the right position to even execute the hand mechanics you're working? There is a such thing as order. Put your feet down first. When you go from sleep to work, you put your feet down first. And so in the optimal defensive line training system, the first level as it pertains to run or the pass program, we talk about stance. We talk about that first, but not only do we talk about stance, because in your stance, there are three very important things that are essential to a good stance. There are three things that must be in place, that must be engaged. You got triple flexion. Triple flexion speaks to being loaded at the hip, knee, and ankle. So the feet placement are first when you identify the proper stance. And I'm not just talking about the depth, or I'm not just talking about the stagger stance. I'm also talking about the neutral stance. Whatever it is, the stance you need to be in for the assignment that you have, right? Because there are stances you have for the assignment. There are different stances you need to be in to execute a certain move, right? You don't get into the same stance you would in a single leg plyo jump that you would into a squat. Those are two different stances for the moves you have to execute, for the exercise you have to do. You're going to get into a different stance in one exercise than you would with another. Same thing. If I'm going to execute a move, if there's a certain move I'm going to do in karate, I was taught that sometimes you may need to change your stance to actually execute the move. Likewise, when it comes to performing or doing a particular move, sometimes it's going to require for you to change your stance. Now, some coaches may say, oh, you can't be changing your stance because then the offensive lineman's going to know what you're going to do. The offensive lineman may think he's going to know what you're going to do because there's so much you can do when you change your stance. There isn't one thing I'm going to do when I change my stance. Matter of fact, I might change my stance just to get you to think I'm going to do something new, and I might not. And you sitting here thinking you're a step ahead of me, and you're not. The issue is when we stay in the same stance over and over again, and we do the same thing over and over again, or we're in a certain stance, and we can't execute what we want to execute because we're not in the proper stance. To me, there is an order. There is something that you must do to help yourself truly progress as a defensive lineman the right way. I would like to share something with you because I love as I'm talking to my big dogs out there who are listening to me. Appreciate you spending time with Big Dawg. And so therefore I feel like I can tell you this. My daughter, whom I love, and I've talked about her before in my previous podcast. And you learn when you have children, you learn so much from your children. You learn a lot. To me, it takes a real man to raise a woman. It takes a real man for this young lady to understand who she is as a woman. And I'm just watching my daughter develop, and I'm learning so much from her, from my children, that when you're a child, you don't pay attention to, but when you're a parent, you got to pay attention to a lot of things. And so, my daughter, when she was younger, she went from laying on her back, and then she started to develop into rolling on her stomach. And from that point, obviously she was rolling, which was good, right? Speaks to core strength and development. And then she started to sit up, which is even better. Really good when, you realize you start to, sit up, go from laying on your back, rolling on your stomach, then you start to sit up. That's good. I'm like, man, I never paid attention to this stuff before. I didn't think that there was steps to this stuff. I didn't think that there was any kind of progress that's being made. I didn't think that certain things were really, really important to see your child do. I didn't know this stuff. I took this stuff for granted. And so my daughter went from, once again, laying there on her back to rolling on her stomach to now sitting up and things like that. And so what happened is that I began to see my daughter begin to walk along the couch. And so here she is, she's standing, and I start putting her on her feet to get her to start standing in hopes to get her to start walking. That's what I saw, or that's what we tried to get her to do. And she did. And so follow what I'm saying. Really important what I'm about to say. And so here she is. She's standing on the couch. Obviously she's falling down, but she's standing on the couch, and she's standing up there a little longer. Now daddy put her on her feet, and she's doing a better job now standing on her feet. And all of a sudden, I'm excited because I'm starting to see my daughter take steps. Oh, I'm excited. My daughter's starting to walk. She went from, again, on her back, on her stomach, sitting up. She's standing on the couch, and now she's starting to walk, taking a couple steps and falling down. And I'm excited about that because I'm seeing my firstborn, my daughter. I'm starting to see her progress. And all of a sudden, I'm seeing her, walk along the couch. And each and every day, she's taking more and more steps. And I'm excited about that because I'm watching her develop and grow as my little girl. So let's fast forward a little bit. My daughter is older now, and she's walking. She's taller. She's stronger. She's walking. We've passed that phase. However, what began to happen was that my daughter started, falling a lot, and it was bothering me because I was wondering, why is my child, stumbling over her feet? Is it that she's just clumsy? Is it that I've got to work on her core strength? I'm a coach, what I'm saying? I'm trying to figure out how, as a coach, I can develop my child to be a little bit more functional. What's going on with my child? So Big Dawg, I didn't have an answer for the challenge that was before me. I didn't have an answer. So what I did was I took my child to the doctor. And, my daughter sprouted. My daughter went from one height to another, and over the summer, it just sprouted up. And that's what I thought it might have been, is that maybe my child was just trying to catch up with, the growth that she had over the summer. But the doctor said that might not be the case. So the doctor asked me a couple questions that were really interesting. So the doctor said, Mr. Roll, did your child ever roll? I said, yeah. My child rolled. Yeah. Matter of fact, my child went from rolling, sitting up and rolling, and then we put on her feet. We started getting her to walk along the couch. And the doctor said, wait, what'd you say? I said, oh yeah. My daughter was advanced, because we took her from, sitting up, and we put her, right along the couch, and we had her to start walking along the couch, to kind of strengthen her legs and to get her walking, a little sooner. The doctor said, have you ever seen your child crawl? And I said, She would try to crawl, but I would pick her up and stand her along the couch to get her to start walking. And the doctor said, well, Mr. Rowe, that I think we found the problem. And I was like, what do you mean? My child kind of skipped that phase. I mean, what? She didn't have to crawl if she started walking. And the doctor said that's not true. Part of the reason why your daughter is stumbling and falling is because her body doesn't understand her equilibriums, her eyes, her vision does not understand how far she is away from the ground. The crawling phase of a child is very, very important, Mr. Rowe. Your child must crawl. They must go from knowing how close or how far they are away from the ground. Their bodies calibrate that way. Their bodies work that way to where they know at that point where they're laying on the ground, they are now sitting up from the ground, they are crawling, and then eventually they stand up from the ground. But there is a progression to it in which their body functions that way. If your child never crawled, then this is the reason why your child is having issues with staying on her feet. She missed a phase. Man, I'm sitting there just disappointed because I'm like, you know what? That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. I get it. And there was a phase that I missed. I should have allowed my daughter to crawl, to naturally crawl, not realizing that crawling had a major impact in her development. I skipped that phase. And so what my daughter had to do was she had to have special PE where they had to put her on a skateboard because she was bigger now. And they had to, have her roll herself on a skateboard, not necessarily crawling, but they had to bring her back down to that level to help her development. Man, I couldn't believe it. And I appreciate doctors like that understand and appreciate the process in which a child needs to develop. It blew my mind. Again, I learned a lot with that. Now, at this point, my daughter's doing very well. She doesn't have any problems with stumbling. She runs, she jumps, she plays, she dances, and things like that. But I learned from my daughter that when it comes to development, there is a process. There are phases you can't skip, Big Dawg. Because if you skip a phase trying to advance your athlete, trying to get them to do these amazing moves early, as I did, where I was trying to get my daughter to walk sooner and earlier because that showed that my daughter was a little bit more advanced in development, that had nothing to do with anything. I ended up hurting my daughter as opposed to allowing her to naturally develop and go through the process. We sometimes do the same thing, is that these athletes are skipping phases. And in their development, if they skip these phases, at some point, they are going to stumble and fall because we missed something. There was something in their training that they did not get that they needed. And I'm telling you, that thing is feet mechanics. Where should your feet be? We just sometimes just skip over that, and you see it all the time. Athletes sometimes cannot figure out, why is it that my moves are not working? Why is it that I keep getting beat by the offensive lineman? Where am I falling short? Where am I stumbling in my game? What's going on? And it takes someone to say this. Let me ask you a couple questions. Coach, athlete, let me ask you a couple questions. When you started your training, what's the first thing you started with? Did you go from laying on your stomach, laying on your back, now you're sitting up? And when you sat up, Did you ever crawl? Did you ever go through feet mechanics? Do you understand your body and how it works biomechanically? Do you understand the power that you possess? Do you understand what humility is? Crawling isn't bad. Working on your feet mechanics right now in your stance isn't bad. Understanding the power that you can accumulate in your stance optimally isn't bad. Learning how to accumulate as much power as you can in an isometric, isolated, stationary position isn't bad. At this point, can't skip that part. Did you skip that part? Did you go from A to Z because we want our athletes, we want to show, everyone that my athlete can do these particular pass rush moves already? And sometimes all we're doing is hurting the athlete. And the thing is that it doesn't show up until we watch that film. That's when we see it. That's when we begin to see, man, I can't put my finger on why my athlete is stumbling and falling, or symbolically speaking, why my athlete is a step short. Why is my athlete a step away? Why is it that my pass rusher, why does he keep missing the quarterback? Man, he has a lot of hurries, but not as many sacks as I know that they can get. What is it? Sometimes the reason why they missed a step is because they lost a step. And they lost a step because they did not maximize their steps. And the only thing that allows you to maximize your steps is your stance. And that's why it's the stance, the start, the steps, and the strike. But it starts in your stance. And we don't oftentimes spend enough time with the load. If you don't properly load, you can't explode. The stance is the place where you have to be in optimal position, where you can accumulate so much power, because once you come out of your hips, once you come out of your stance, it's like a cannon. You can't go back in that cannon. Once you shoot out of that optimal position, then you're doing damage in the trenches. You're dynamic and you're dominant because you've accumulated so much power, the momentum that you need to get done what you need to get done on that particular play. But you can't necessarily reestablish the load position. The loading position happens once. Now, yes, there is a moving load in which you acquire on one leg because you got to run. Nobody runs on two legs. There's one leg at a time if you're really exploding. But to be on that 2-foot load happens once. Most of the time, it only happens one time. And you've got to maximize that. And that defensive lineman at the line of scrimmage has to maximize being loaded with 2 feet on the ground and maximizing power out of their stance. That's it. That is essential. And that's where we miss our steps. Sometimes that's where that defensive lineman comes short in his pass rush, or he comes short to a TFL. That's where it is. That's where they stumble. Their stumble is not where they actually fell short. They fell short in their development. My child wasn't necessarily tripping because her shoes was untied. It wasn't because her shoes were too big. Though that's where she was stumbling, that's not where the problem was. Though she was stumbling at a later age, that's not where the problem was. The problem was when she was younger in her development. I had to go back. The doctor helped me to go back to identify this is where the problem was. And see, here's the beautiful thing, right? Is that if you carefully analyze your athletes and you watch that film and you go back like the doctor did for me and identify the problem, it's okay. It's all right. Because now, like a doctor, we can fix it. There are things that we can do to adjust you. There are things that we can do to adjust you. And when you know what the problem is, you can fix it when you know what it is. And I'm not saying the problem is always the feet, but a lot of times it is because we don't spend enough time on it. And that's okay. It's not over. My game is over because I didn't, have the right process. I didn't take the necessary steps to develop myself. No, it's not over yet. But the off season is for an opportunity to go back and see where was the issue? Where was the problem? Why was I a step away? But my point being is that there is an order. There is an order in which you must take to truly develop yourself the right way. If not, you're going to find issues later than sooner. And that's really important when it comes to truly developing your big dogs in the trenches. So as it pertains to your stance, a lot of times, and I'll talk on this, and we'll continue to transition through the podcast here in this series on how should I train as a D lineman in the off season. One of the problems that I see in a stance, is that defensive linemen's, even outside backers, and if you go back and watch the film and look for this, his power foot, when I say power foot, I mean his front foot. For me, the power foot is the front foot. His power foot is flat on the ground. His power foot is flat on the ground. That is a problem. That is a problem. Here's why. My dad was a track coach, big time track coach, as I mentioned before in my previous podcast. And I learned a lot biomechanically about sprinting, about exploding, as a sprinter. My dad was a sprinter in college, like I mentioned before. My brothers were sprinters, and I watched him train numerous people, guys that were working on the combines, guys that were trying to get ready for their pro days, guys that wanted to come back, that was in the NFL, that wanted to get faster, guys that were participating in the Olympics. I watched my dad train the sprinters to be fast. And I've seen him, get guys fast. And one of the things that he would talk about is how important that shin angle was. Shin angle. That shin angle. And if you've trained with a sprint coach, if you trained with someone with speed, or hopefully a sprint coach, somebody who knows what they're doing. And again, there are a lot of people out there that have a passion for this stuff. And for some reason, when it comes to defensive linemen, they don't think they need to know how to run. You need to learn how to run. I can't tell you how many athletes that I get that don't know how to run. I don't like guys that run like they fat boys. I don't like that fat boy job. Yeah, it's necessary sometimes, but I don't coach fat boys. I coach athletes. And I don't care how much stuff you got hanging off. That's not what I'm saying. You got to be an athlete. You got to know how to run. You have to know how to cover the distance in a short period of time, because you don't have a lot of time. How can I get from A to B as quickly as possible? Well, you better get your body working mechanically to get you from A to B as quickly as possible. But looking at a sprinter in the blocks and looking at them being set up in position to explode out of the blocks, one of the things that are really important is where your feet are set in the block, where your knee is in relationship to your foot in the blocks. You will never find a sprinter in the blocks with their knee directly over their toe. I'm talking about vertically over their toe. You will never, ever find that. Big Dawg, if you do, send it to me. I would love to see it. But in all the years I've been around track and the Olympics and sprinters and all that stuff, never seen it. Not saying it don't exist, but I haven't seen it ever. And I love track as well. I love the idea of running and how the body works and all that stuff when it comes to sprinting. I've never seen it. When you put your power foot flat on the ground, Big Dawg, do you know what happens? What happens is that you get that vertical alignment. You get that knee directly over the toe. Is that what we want to explode off the ball? We don't want that. We don't want that shin angle vertically aligned. We don't want that. What we want is what I call 45 drive. That's what we want. 45-degree angle. And the only way that you're going to get that 45 drive or that 45 degree at the shin on the power foot is if you have that foot behind the knee at a 45 degree. The foot has to be behind the knee at a 45 degree. Behind the knee at a 45 degree. Get your foot behind the knee at a 45 degree. And in order for you to have that shin angle, your heel cannot be down. You're on the balls of your feet, your power foot, you're on the ball, because when you're on the ball of your feet, you engage the leg. If you're on all your toes, that's why your heels have to be turned out if you're talking about a pass rush. That engages all of the muscle fibers in your leg, which will ultimately end in great output. But you gotta load your toes, Big Dawg. You gotta load that power leg. But the foot has to be positioned behind the knee at a 45 degree. Something as small as that is huge for a lot of biomechanical reasons, because the way that foot is positioned in your stance is going to determine what happens next. It's going to determine the position that you're going to be in when you take that next step. You are already prepping yourself to not play with leverage because your whole foot is on the ground. Now you're fighting your body to stay down when your shin is telling you to come up. Big Dawg, it's the small things like that that make a big difference in a lineman's game. When you put your whole heel down like that, you're playing in the ground. You are burying yourself in the ground. You are planting yourself in the ground. You know how much time it takes to bury something and then uproot it out of the ground? You just buried it in. How much time does that take? That takes too much time. When you bury something, you don't plan on pulling it out no time soon because it takes too much time to bury something. If I want to put something down and pick it back up, I put it on top of the ground, Big Dawg. You understand what I'm saying with this analogy? I don't have time to bury something in the ground if I got to use it again. You can't bury yourself in the ground, and that's what happens when you put your heel down. When you put your heel down, you bury yourself in the ground. When you put your heel down, you're burying yourself in the ground. And you've got to uproot yourself to take the next step. That takes too long. How can I get triple extension with my heel on the ground? You got triple flexion, but you will never obtain triple extension if your foot stays at dorsiflex position. That means bit. That means your shins are engaged. And that's the issue. The issue is, and this is just one of them, a common error is that defensive linemen, even linebackers blitzing off the edge, look at them, their foot's flat on the ground. Now, go back and watch some pass rushers rush out of a 2-point stance. Watch them. That power foot's flat on the ground. Now watch this. Look at it closely. Put it in slow motion. Watch what happens mechanically for that defensive end to actually move forward. If you want to move forward, then your shin has to be angled forward. Pretend your knee is the arrowhead of the arrow. Where is your knee facing? Is it facing the sky? Or is it facing your target? Because if your knee is not facing your target, then you're not attacking your target. And that is the issue. Now watch what happens. You see him in a 2-point stance. You see his whole foot down. And before he actually makes any progress, I'm not talking about he's throwing his hands, or I'm not talking about he's taking a false step. You ain't moving nowhere. You moving, but you ain't going nowhere. I'm talking about pay attention to what his body does from the knee down to actually go forward. I'll tell you what actually happens was that his knee shifts in front of his toe to form the 45 degree. And when that 45 drive happens, his heel is off the ground. So the body's saying here, if you want us to move this vehicle forward, if you want us to move this mass, then we have to reposition ourselves to move forward, which means our shin angle needs to be in place. You're not going to have that shin angle with a flat heel. So watch this. Do you think you're wasting time when your body mechanically has to go from a flat heel to a lifted heel? Do you think that takes time? How much time do you think that takes? Do you think that's necessary movement? Would you consider that negative movement, or would you consider that part of getting off the ball? Lower your heel down on the ground and then push off ball of your foot. Think about it. Again, I know this is not track, but track is a very good sport to go to look at how to explode. Because you want to come out of your stance like you're in the blocks. You want to come out of your stance as if you're in the blocks. Now, when I say blocks, if you know anything about track and an athlete is in the blocks, watch this. Again, tell me how many sprinters that are in the blocks have their heel flat on the ground. As a matter of fact, if you know what a block is, and I know a lot of us do, there are actual pedals, to give you an example, or there's an actual mechanism that forces the athlete, the sprinter, to get their heel high. Because in having a high heel is forcing the knee in front of the toe, which you're there just in the position you're in, and it's allowing that 45 drive to happen. Think about it. And there's a way where you can adjust how high you want your heel. And that all depends on that sprinter and what they feel best coming out of, where they feel that they can come out of their stance or the blocks optimally. There's an adjustment there for their heel. But once again, I don't know of any sprinter that really explodes out of their stance in their blocks and their heel is flat on the ground. Why? Because it doesn't work. Why? Because that's negative movement. That takes too much time. Likewise, it does take time for a defensive lineman to go from a flat heel, to a lifted heel. You're not going to go forward until that heel comes off the ground. Why? Because you have to uproot yourself out of the ground. A good D lineman plays on top of the ground, not in the ground, on top of the ground. We don't have time to stay nowhere for long. Yeah, I was there, but now I'm not. I don't have time to put my heel on the ground. I got to move. I got to get going. Is that costing your defensive lineman, your pass rusher, a step? It is, Big Dawg. It is. And see, it's the little things like that that causes our guys to stumble. Coach, I can't get there. Coach, I'm trying to get there. Coach, I'm beating the guy in front of me, but for some reason, I just keep coming a step short. Yeah, there are other variables that dictate why they're coming a step short, but it's one of those variables. The fact that we missed a phase is one of those variables that we did not take the time to teach the essentials and the importance of your feet in a stance. I'm not talking about your feet in the steps. I'm not even talking about your feet in the set. I'm not even talking about your feet in the strike. We're not even there yet, Big Dawg, in this series. I'm talking about your feet in your stance. Is that important? Is there an order to training your big guys in the offseason? Absolutely. If you want them to be dynamic, if you want them to be able to deal with any hog that's in front of them, any offensive lineman that tries to stand in their way, absolutely there's an order when it comes to properly developing your dogs. There is. And we look over the small things. It's in the details. Domination is in the details. It is in the details. A lot of times when I work with guys on the NFL level, we're not reinventing the wheel. There isn't anything new under the sun. It's no kind of crazy drill that I'm doing. There are some things that I have to kind of come up with to kind of help develop some skills that are needed. But it's nothing crazy. What it is the detail. Spending time looking at the specifics and diagnosing our big dogs and identifying where the issue lies. Big Dawg, I just gave you one thing that I recommend you go back and look at. One thing. Now, there are a lot of things, but look at that one thing. Is that heel flat on the ground? So simple, but so detrimental. It's the small voxes that spoil the vine, baby. Those small things that make a big difference. I don't have time to backpedal. When I say backpedal, I mean I don't have time to drop my heel and fire. I don't have that time. I gotta go. I gotta move. I gotta move this mass. I gotta get going. And that's important. Before I let you go, something else I want you to think about. Well, coach, I actually have my heel up off the ground. I have that. But for some reason, I'm still not getting off the ball like I want to. What's the issue? What do you think is going on? Is your posterior, talking about your lower extremities, your legs, is your posterior strong enough to keep your heel from dropping? Are you locking your calf to keep your heel from collapsing? Now you're backpedaling. Now you're going the wrong way, Big Dawg. You're going backwards before you go forward. Is that costing you a step? A step that you can't afford to lose? The answer is absolutely. That's costing you a step that you can't afford to lose. Every step matters. What's your feet per second? How many steps are you taking towards your opposition? How many steps are you taking towards your target within the seconds that you are allowed? Because you don't have that much time, Big Dawg. You don't have all day long to get to where you got to go. You don't have all day, which means you can't waste steps. And I can't get to where I want to go unless I maximize my steps. Can't take false steps. The athlete that spends less time in negative movement is the one that's going to succeed the most. I guarantee that. I guarantee it. Are you backpedaling? Is your heel collapsing? You may have your heel up, but is it collapsing down? Well, you're going the wrong way. There are things in the weight room that you have to do. There's some small fixes you can do on the field too, but to affirm the strength, that posterior strength, you got to go and work on your heel not dropping. You got to work on your calves. You got to work on locking your heel in that position, establishing a stabilizer. In essence, you pretty much want to imagine that you, again, thinking about the sprinter coming out of the blocks, you want to imagine that there is a mechanism there, that there is an actual pedal underneath your heel that won't allow it to drop, right? That's the whole point of the blocks. That's part of it, is that there's something there that when you push off the blocks, your heel won't drop. When you push off the block, your heel won't drop. And when you're in your stance, there is a block. There is a block underneath your heel that's not allowing it to drop because you can't afford to backpedal. You can't go backwards. And if that heel drops, Big Dawg, you just lost your shin angle. And if you lost your shin angle, you lost your leverage. It's the domino effect. Will that impact a defensive lineman's game? Absolutely. If he's not paying attention to his feet work. Man, that's the difference maker in the game for that athlete. It's important to analyze these things, to pay attention to these things. It's really important to make sure that those feet mechanics are working at the point of firing, at the point of driving and exploding. It's important when you talk about explosion, the thing that stabilizes is just as important as the thing that fires out. Because if your posterior is not strong enough to handle the fire, then it'll collapse on you. And if it collapses on you, you're not exploding forward, right? Imagine you're doing a bench press. If I'm pushing the bar away from my chest, but the bench is not strong enough to hold my push, it's going to be very, very difficult for me to push anything forward or up if my back is not stabilized. You need stabilization to fire forward. For anything to go in one direction, the opposite direction must stabilize. That's a principle. That is a biomechanic principle when it talks about fire and force transference, right? Something has to be in place and stabilized in order to generate the applied force you need. It's all part of it. That's the science of it. And understanding these things allows your game to not be guesswork. You know what you're trying to do. You know how to truly optimize your get off because you know every muscle in your body, those muscle fibers know by muscle memory, by drills, by training, they know what they're assigned to do and they're on their task. So Big Dawg, to sum this up, it starts in your stance. Not only the stance, but it starts with your feet in the stance. Look at these common errors. Look at what that power foot is doing. Look at the position that it's in. Check to see where the heel is, whether it's flat on the ground, or check to see whether it's so high that it's dropping down. Check to see what that power foot is doing, and you will probably find one of the answers to the problem. There is an order, and you can't skip phases. If you truly want to develop your athlete the right way, you can't skip stuff. Because at some point in their game, they're going to trip and fall. Big Dawg, I appreciate you spending time with me as we sit here and talk trenches. Big Dawg, I'm telling you, I got a lot to talk about, and I'm just getting started because I have a passion for defensive linemen, pass rushers to be trained the right way. It's important. We owe it to them to give them our best. We owe it to these athletes to be the best that they can be. We owe it to them. And they got to be developed the right way. Big Dawg, I got a lot for you. I know you got a lot for me, and I'm going to be here, right here, getting us better, getting us ready, and getting our athletes ready to be the best dog in the trenches as they can be. When you get a chance, Big Dawg,
Let's work.
make sure you take a visit to www.bigdawgfootball.com. That's www. Make sure you put the 3 W's in there. www.bigdawgfootball.com. Make sure you pay me a visit. It's one of the quickest growing websites, defensive line websites out there right now. A lot of people are visiting. A lot of people are subscribing because I put my heart and soul into this. And there's constantly things being updated. There's going to continue to be exclusive podcasts on my websites that talk through the optimal defensive line training system. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for being with me. Big Dawg, you already know what time it is. Let's go to work.
Work. Work. Work. Work. Work. Work. Work. Let's work. 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 Let's work.